Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC week number 4 overview and analysis video in the summer split. This is the final week of the, quote-unquote regular season here in the LEC. We are going to be narrowing it down to the top 8 teams by the end of this episode. That means 2 teams will officially be done for the summer split and potentially for the year, depending on how things end up working out, depending on who gets in that bottom 2. But every single game this week ends up mattering. You really got to step it up and, win when it matters the most to even have a chance of qualifying for that top 8 to get yourself into a position where you can earn those championship points. So some very important games. If you want to know my thoughts on what has happened in the LEC up until this point, the games that have gone down and where these teams are, you can of course check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. That's going to have every single week of the LEC reviewed and overviewed, if you will. And, if you want to know my thoughts there, that's definitely a good place to check out. But today, we are going to be going over week number 4, and we are going to be previewing very lightly the playoffs at the end of this. I'll be giving my thoughts on which teams I think will be more likely moving on. But of course, in the LEC, there is at least one major upset in the playoffs every single year. So there's definitely a lot of things to talk about. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we do on this channel is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team is able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week. Now, to add on top of that, I will be giving my regular season All-Pro team as well. I'm only doing the first team. There are so few games that I think it's only really fair to highlight the best player in each role, in my opinion, through the first 9 games of the split. But, as I've done for the previous splits, it's really such a small sample size that I wouldn't read too much into it. But, that'll be on top of the player of the week. And then instead of doing my power rankings like I usually do at the end of this video, we are just going to be talking about the playoff bracket. It's essentially irrelevant what teams I think are better than what other teams unless they actually have a chance of playing each other in the best of 3 stage. So we will be going over that at the end of the video. But let's jump right into it. There is a lot to cover today. We've got, of course, the 10 normal games that we have, but some potential tiebreakers as well. So I want to jump right into it, and that means starting off with day number 1, and we actually kick day 1 off with a little bit of an upset. It's Fnatic taking on Team Heretics, and Heretics is actually going to pick up the win here. They're going to get a really strong win and a very important one for them. 3 is likely the magic number. It's been the magic number in the LEC over the past couple of splits. If you win 3 games, you are likely in the top 8. It is, very unlikely that there are 9 teams in the league with 3 wins, and so Heretics picking up a pretty surprise win here is actually major for their chances at getting into the playoffs. Not that I was ever super in doubt. As bad as they played last week and as inconsistent as they have been, I still had them in my top 8, just barely at number 8, but this was a good performance. I think a lot of it is on them, and a lot of it is on Fnatic. This was a really bad game, a very flippy game from Fnatic, very not clean. Like, there's really no other way to say it. Fnatic did not play well here, and that is at least a bit of a concern, which we will bring up, but let's talk about what Heretics did well. First of all, player of the game is absolutely going to go to Wunder in the top lane, and man, is that a sight for sore eyes. He has not been particularly good over the course of 2024, in my opinion, for this Heretics team. He's been very weak in lane, certainly not the player that you traditionally saw in side lanes, just kind of dominating and adding pressure to his team regardless of whether or not he was involved in team fights or received resources. That's really not been him over the course of this year. His 1v1ing ability has really dropped off. I think that break on Fnatic really hurt him, and he doesn't seem to have like a ton of resources on this team either. And so when you're sitting in a position where he's losing 1v1 and he's also really not getting a ton of resources to play for the late game, then really what is he doing on the team? And I've been critical of that, but this was the exact example of why you don't try to dive Wunder. First of all, he picked Mordekaiser in this game, and Mord is one of those champions that I constantly think about as like, why is he not like a pro staple because of the kit? Like, I understand the numbers are a little bit low, but the kit is so universally good in almost any circumstance. Like, I know there are obviously certain circumstances in which you wouldn't want Mord, but it's kind of in a similar vein to someone like a Cassante to me, obviously just not quite as broken. Like, he just does a lot of things. He does a lot of things that you want in basically every circumstance. The ult is always useful. His laning is always going to be at least relatively fine. It's just kind of surprising to me that Mord isn't more universally picked throughout Pro, but Wunder pulled it out here, and it looked really good, and, we'll see more of Mordekaiser this week, both in the picks and the bans, and so, good for him. You can't dive him, and certainly Razork and Oscar Rinnan ended up trying. I think they threw away kind of the Skarner here because they just weren't really able to get any pressure on the top side, and this is the problem with attempting to put pressure into Wunder, is that he's really good at countering that, even if he hasn't been great at generating it himself over the course of this split. I also think Zviru was much better in this game on the Corki he is really kind of disappointed over the course of this split. He's been one of the weaker mid laners in the LEC. He has lost super consistently, and so nice to see him go up against Humanoid, who has been pretty fantastic over the course of this year, and just kind of dominate him. We'll talk about Humanoid in a second, because there are some concerning trends that are starting to develop with him, but GIANTX was good on the Sedge. Flacken and Trimby were really solid. Trimby did a really good job of engaging, especially counter-engaging throughout a lot of this game on the Alistair, and so I really want to highlight him as well. But, you know, this was a nice team win for Team Heretics, and again, they really needed it. That third win could be super consequential, and this might have just been enough, regardless of what happens on the second day, to get them in to the top 8. And then for Fnatic on the other side of this, there are some real concerns, because quite frankly, they were bad this game. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that Heretics was perfect. They could have been a little bit more aggressive, in my opinion, even if they did make some good plays, but Fnatic made a lot of bad plays in this game. And I know people were expecting Fnatic to be a bit more flippy than what they actually turned out to be through the first couple weeks of the season, but I'm really kind of frustrated to see some of the problems pop up right before playoffs. It's such an unfortunate time. Dead of the game is going to go to Humanoid in the mid lane on the Varus. This is a really bad time for Humanoid to be playing the worst League of Legends of the year. Like, he was not very good last week in week number 3 either, and he's obviously this was a really bad game. The Varus was clearly not a pick that ended up working out. Zviru, who's been a bad mid laner, was able to kind of take advantage of him. And Humanoid is a very streaky player. We've talked about it for years on this channel. There are going to be stretches where Humanoid is actually just bad, which is why I've held off of, you know, calling him like an A-tier player in the LEC. He's performed like an A-tier player over the course of this year, but, you know, if you're going to have these runs where you're inconsistent, then I have to be a bit concerned, and it would truly be tragic if Humanoid's best run this year came at the opposite time of what it normally does. Usually it's in these big pivotal moments towards the end of the year. If he had his best parts of the year at the beginning of the year and things start to get worse now, that's going to be really disappointing. Razork has also been slightly worse. I think his decision-making has just been a little bit sloppier over the past couple of weeks. I think that will clean up. Razork has been so good, and I think there was real progression at the beginning of the year in terms of his decision-making. I expect that to get better, again, when games get more important. Oscar was not nearly as good as Wunder, but Oscar loses. Sometimes you just have to live with that. And Noah and June were, all in all, pretty inconsequential towards this game as a whole. Fnatic didn't really play well. There are real things to criticize, but again, I'm not just going to freak out after 1 or 2 losses this split. There are a lot of things that could still go right for Fnatic, and you could also chalk this up to them just not taking this game very seriously, and I think that that's a pretty reasonable excuse. But really big win for Heretics. It's nice to see them actually get in the win column after, you know, pretty tumultuous past few weeks. I still don't think this team has gotten rid of all of their problems, but it's nice to know that they still can win games if, you know, they are given the right circumstance. Then moving on to our second game of day number 1, and it's a battle of 2 and 5 teams really looking to pick up some important spots here. It's Rogue taking on GIANTX, and GX is going to pick up the win here. They're going to move to 3 and 5, like I said, a very nice place to be. GX definitely came into this as the favorites. I think they've been looking a lot better than people, me being people, anticipated. I really did not think a lot of this roster. I thought the moves that they made, you know, going into summer weren't necessarily going to be upgrades or downgrades. I thought this team was just generally going to be lacking talent in a lot of key areas, but honestly, they have overperformed, especially in some pretty key areas, specifically the solo lanes, which have been obviously the carries over the course of this split. Jackie's has very, very notably been amazing. I think a lot of people have been able to notice just how good Jackie's has been. Antonio has also been fantastic. That's been a little bit less talked about, just generally because Jackie's has been so good, but I think the solo laners have definitely been the strength of GX, but when the rest of the team really steps up like this, when the bot lane looks good, when the jungle looks good, when they're kind of the focal points for a majority of the game, all of a sudden you're looking at a really, really scary formula for GX, especially in a league where so many teams are just kind of bad right now. It's like the top 4 teams all feel okay, and then everybody else is kind of garbage. When GX is playing relatively stable and they have a clear game plan to win, they can win through multiple places, that's actually kind of dangerous and could potentially be like a top 5 or 6 kind of, you know, roster in that regard. So we'll talk about it. Rogue is also trash. Like, I was very much right to keep this team at 10. They're just so bad in so many different areas. There are 2 players in particular that I have to highlight for just being horrible in this game, but player of the game is going to go to Juhan in the jungle. I think this is a bit surprising. Broadcast gave it to Antonio, and I do kind of understand for some of the flashier plays. I think this should go to either the jungler or one of the bot lane members for GX. I think they were the most valuable in this game. I'm going to give it to Juhan because he was really good here on the Maokai. This is a bit of the signature champion for Juhan. I think some people forget that he is a tank player. He's a facilitator. He kind of fills that role that Peach had. He just was supposed to give you more upside in terms of the consistency that offered, and That's not been the case, I would say, over the course of this split. I see some people really praising Juhan. I think people forget just how bad he was in the first couple weeks of the split for GX, but since things have settled in, since Jackies and Antonio have both started to play well more consistently, I think Juhan has taken a nice role in making sure that Jackies in particular is in a good spot, and he did so again. He's just such a good team fighter on the Maokai. It really is kind of a specialty of his, but I want to give a big shout out to Patrick and Ignar, who I really don't think have been that good this year. In fact, I think Patrick has been kind of bad for a majority of this year. Ignar has been essentially irrelevant for GX over the course of this year, but it's nice to see them play Jinx Alistar and absolutely dominate a 2v2, because that really should not happen. Like, the fact that that happened is completely disrespectful, and, you know, we'll get into it in a second, but, you know, Antonio was also good, made some big plays on the Gragas. Jackies was obviously very good. The Kai'Sa mid, the Lucian mid, you know, Varus mid, we're seeing a lot of marksmen just get moved around because they are so strong right now, and, you know, generally, I think Jackies is one of the more adept marksman mid players, but I don't really like this draft from GX. I just don't like the draft from Rogue more. I think generally speaking, you know, we'll talk about this now, I guess. GX's draft is very counterable. There are a lot of things you can do to end up beating them. Rogue doesn't really have any of the tools to do that, and especially with them losing early, it basically became impossible. But, you know, GX's draft, I think, is one that could have been exploited by a better team. Rogue's draft, though, is just such a high level of execution. Like, this is a hard draft to make work, and you're Rogue. Like, you're the worst team in the league, and you draft one of the most difficult to execute comps you could probably pick. You know, at this level, it really just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I really think this is a horrible draft, and I think it set them behind a lot, but GX at least was able to get that early game lead. I thought Juhan was really good, but this was, again, a bit of a team effort for GX, and then for Rogue, God, they're bad. Like, individually, they're just really bad. And the players that sucked this game are definitely disappointing to, you know, see. I think there are two that could very much get done of the game, and honestly, both of them deserve it. I'm going to give it to Comp. I thought he was worse throughout the entirety of this game. How do you play Ezreal Leona and not only lose the 2v2 to Jinx Alistar? Because, first of all, that's already really bad, but I mean, go watch him play Ezreal. Has the dude ever played this champion before? Obviously he has. He's played it in pro and he's been really good at it, but missing Qs, applying zero pressure, like literally doing nothing, getting completely rolled. This felt like a random Emerald player just put right into the middle of a pro game because he was so scared and he was missing skill shots and he looked nervous. Like, I don't know what you want me to say. Comp is completely washed right now. He has been by far the worst AD carry in the LEC over the course of 2024. It's not even been remotely close, and, you know, it's just such a drop off. Again, 2022 feels like such an outlier for him individually as a player, and this org simply has to move in a different direction next year. Zoe certainly doesn't help things, although I do think he is held back a little bit by the fact that Comp is so bad. And then the other player that you're going to want to give done of the game to is Finn in the top lane. Whatever the hell happened in the back half of this game with him just like walking to his death for absolutely no reason. Finn has generally been fine, but I can understand the idea of him potentially being mental boomed. But this team is not out of playoffs. Honestly, this has probably been their most successful split in terms of actual results on the Rift, and so to see Finn just kind of run it down at the end, to see Comp like really underperforming, it's really disappointing that Rogue is collapsing in a situation where they might be the worst team in the LEC, but somehow they still have put themselves in a position to get into playoffs if things go right, if things kind of turn their way. Their schedule really wasn't all that difficult this week, and, you know, obviously it didn't work out for them at the beginning here. So they have another chance on day 2. It's still a pretty easy game, and even then, you're probably going to get at least one tiebreaker if you lose, and so you have a lot of chances here for Rogue to get into that top 8, but right now I just don't know if the team has the talent to do so. And for GX, at least they're figuring stuff out right now. You know, I don't think this team is extraordinary. Again, I think they have a bit of a talent gap, but the only teams that are going to be able to consistently beat them are teams that know how to use that talent. Basically, every other team is more talented than they are in terms of 5v5, but they are so much more clear and concise than those other teams that I think they might actually reach a level in the standings that some people are just going to be shocked by. Then moving on now to game number 3, and it's another interesting one to talk about. It's G2 Esports taking on Team Vitality, and G2, unsurprisingly, is going to pick up the win, but Vitality is just in complete freefall mode at the current moment. This org has been known to, you know, kind of shit the bed down the stretch, for lack of a better term. They have been known for really not finishing strong in terms of the LEC, and that seems to be continuing right now. They're going to move to 2 and 6, and like we said, 3 is the magic number right now. 2 could get you a tiebreaker, but it could also just get you into the bottom 2 if there are enough teams that get 3 wins. And so Vitality kind of in a really unfortunate situation going into the final day. They don't get it easier from here. The schedule doesn't get easier from here for them. It's a really rough end of the year, but G2 getting to that 6th win, they have been essentially untouchable after their weird week number 1. MSI hangover is definitely something that you can say was real for them, but at the same time, you know, as we've been saying the entire entire split, this split doesn't matter for them. There is literally nothing for them to win other than another trophy. Like, it is just pride at this point. They've already qualified for season finals, and I don't even think this split affects their standing. They're already going to be number 1 in terms of championship points, and they won both winter and spring. They're just really going for the golden road in terms of the domestic run at this point, which is, cool for them, but, I'm not going to freak out over any sort of weird underperformances. That being said, they dominated this game. It was sub 24 minutes, and they won across the board. Caps is going to get player of the game. He's looked better, I would say, in the second half of this split. Obviously, this guy's been sensational throughout this year. Caps has reasserted why he is considered the best Western player of all time, and I don't even think it's really all that debatable anymore. He has utterly dominated the LEC over the course of this year, but in summer, he's been a little bit more hit or miss. I think he's been limit testing a tad bit more than maybe he was in the first couple of splits, and it's led to some situations where he's getting himself in trouble. This game, not so much. VTO was horrible on the other side of this matchup, which we will talk about, but Caps absolutely brutalized him. Corki continues to look like a really good pick. I still think it would be really successful down in the bot lane, as we've seen basically every time any team has wanted to take him down there, but teams are just much more comfortable with him playing mid because mid laners have a ton more practice on the champion. So I understand that, but Caps looked really good here. I think everybody else obviously looked great. Yike was excellent in this game on the Maokai. One thing I want to point out about the G2 comp, this is really like a 2023 G2 comp in terms of the Braum in the support position, the Maokai in the jungle, the Gragas in the top lane, even the Corki in the mid lane. This is something they would have played a lot last year, and I think they still are able to execute on it well, even in a meta where not every single pick here is the most relevant in the entire world. But Yike looked excellent here on the Maokai, again, controlling the pace of the game, allowing the Corki to take over in mid-game fights, and then just translate that to very easy closeouts. It's what you want to see from the jungle mid duo. Broken Blade was better than Photon on the top side, even if he didn't have a ton to do, and Hans and Mickey were definitely better than Karzi and Hylissang on the other side of this matchup. So for G2, just kind of winning across the board, and for Vitality, just kind of losing across the board. Again, this is a pretty detrimental loss towards their playoff case because you really need to get to that third win. It wasn't expected to be here, and quite frankly, they might not get to that third win with how their schedule ends up going towards the end of this week, but it's the same players that are underperforming. At the beginning of the year, we were like, oh, this team's got a lot of upside, but they need to find consistency. At the beginning of this split, you had players like Photon continuing to underperform, but the constants for Vitality have been VTO and Hylissang just not playing particularly well, and it's frustrating because I think both of them were okay earlier on in the year. VTO in particular was really good in winter. I think some people forget that. Maybe not as good as in spring, and he's been really bad. Here in summer, he's going to get dud of the game, got completely outplayed by Caps, just was never really relevant, was missing ultimates going in, alongside Hilly in situations where he was just instantly going to die. Positioning was bad, decision-making was bad, mechanics were bad. VTO has just not been playing well, and it's really costing this Vitality team. He is probably the most primary carry that they have in terms of, mentality. He is the one that they wanted to funnel resources into at the beginning of the year. It's not really worked out like that. Karzi has kind of had to step up and take that spot, and I do think Karzi has been inconsistently good over the course of this split. He's been what he's been basically for his entire career, a player who on his good days is going to look good, on his bad days is going to look horrible. He's going to be both a player and a dud of the week candidate every week, and it's just kind of what you have to live with. But VTO underperforming, I think, has really limited what Vitality has been able to do, and that compounds on the fact that Hylissang has also just been really bad this split. Now, I've attributed a lot of it on this channel to the fact that this team has not been able to properly follow up with Hylissang. You're going to look really bad if you're an aggressive support and the rest of your team doesn't really want to take a lot of the engages that you want to do. They don't want to take these 50-50 fights that you yourself are initiating, but now they are taking them. In this game, they very much followed up on basically everything that Hylissang was doing, and they still got absolutely smacked in every single fight. And so I don't really know what to say. Hylissang has really disappointed. Linsas got, completely out-jungled here, if only for the fact that he's playing Karthus, and this game was never going to go all that late. I don't really understand what the point of the Karthus pick here was, but it very much didn't work out. Photon and Karzi, I guess, were along for the ride, but Vitality's in real danger of not being a team that ends up making top 8, which would be a disaster for them. The expectations going in to the split were top 4, let alone, making top 8. That was the anticipation. So if they choke it again down the stretch, it's going to be an utter disaster for them, but it is a nice win for G2. Not really consequential. Again, they qualified last week for the top 8. They're not in a bad spot. They just want to gain as much confidence as they can, as much consistency as they can going into playoffs, and attempt to go for 3 in a row. And then moving on now to game number 4. We're in the back half of day number 1, and it's another relatively expected outcome. It's SK Gaming taking on Corp, and SK is going to pick up the win. They moved to 7-1. This team has really solidified themselves at the top of the standings in terms of being one of the best teams in the LEC. I don't really think there's much debate over that anymore. I think a lot of people have attributed that to the bot lane, and obviously that is probably the correct place to put it. Rahel and Luan have been probably the most impactful players to their individual teams over the course of this year. It's why, I said last week that Rahel was leading my MVP, conversation for the summer split, because he really was that important towards what SK was doing. But again, that takes away from the good stuff that the rest of this SK roster is doing as well. It's not like it's just Rahel and Luan. It's the fact that, a lot of these players were already playing well. Players like Niski and, we'll talk about Irrelevant in just a second, were already playing well. And then Rahel and Luan just solidified themselves coming in on the bot side, being the best bot lane in the league. And it allowed the rest of these players to continue to do their thing without having to be primary options on the team, and I think it's really helped them, and it's helped Irrelevant a lot. He's going to get player of the game for me. I think he's somehow been more consistent in summer. I know a lot of people have been talking about his summer as if it's somehow been worse than his spring or his winter, because people were just way too high on him in spring and winter. Again, I'm a fan of Irrelevant. I feel like that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle in terms of how I talk about him. I'm a fan of his game. I think he's a really talented top laner. I just think that the conversation went significantly too far over the course of the beginning part of the year. Talking about him as the best top laner in the league, I think that was just, it's not where he's at, right? He is a very, very good top laner. He is a clear above average, like a B+ caliber top laner, but the problem with Irrelevant has always been his inconsistency in losing matchups. He's had a lot more bad games this year than people give him credit for, but when the games work, when he's out there and he's in good matchups and he feels comfortable, he looks amazing. He's right up there with every other top laner in terms of ability to take over the game, and that's what we saw here. He is player of the game on the Gnar. He completely destroyed Kana in the 1v1, and just generally in the top lane matchup, and translated that into just completely taking over the game. It was clear that he was the most valuable player in this game for SK. I think some people, like I said, are looking at summer as a bit of a downgrade for him, but he really hasn't had bad games in the summer split, which again is kind of a new thing for him. He's usually been relatively inconsistent as a player, especially in bad matchups. I think his ability to shore up his, way to play weak side, I think generally not having a ton of attention thrown into him by the enemy team because of how dangerous the bot lane has become. A lot of these things have really helped him, and honestly, he's been more consistent, in my opinion, in the summer split, even if the highs haven't been nearly as high. But the rest of this team was good as well. Niski has been playing out of his mind. Again, another player that just gets way too much hate from the community. He is way too good. He's a multiple-time MVP, and he's considered just kind of an afterthought in the mid lane position. This guy is genuinely one of the top 3 to 4 mid laners without competition in the LEC, and I think that has become more and more clear as we've continued to play. He's really gotten back to playing like peak Niski kind of gameplay where he's just everywhere on the map all the time and he makes his jungler look much better. Isma is still somebody that's struggling a little bit in terms of establishing that mid-game prio where it just sometimes feels like he loses the idea of where he needs to be, but it's been good enough because, again, bot lane's really good, even if bot lane was the lane to take a back seat in this one, which is also a very encouraging sign. A lot going right for SK and a lot to really like about them. And for Corp on the other side, for the most part, this is fine. Like, generally speaking, they've already overperformed your expectations. They were sitting at 3 wins going into this week. They were all the way up at number 5 in my power rankings purely because there were no other teams actually winning games. I don't feel great about this team. I think they have very clear weaknesses, and I think that gets exposed when they go up against actual good teams like SK Gaming, and we kind of saw that here. Kana really has not been all that great here in the LEC. He's going to get done of the game. I know some people were really kind of hyping him up, and I liked him in the LCK, but as I talked about in my primer video, going into the summer split, you just never really know how someone's going to adapt to a new environment, and specifically, like I always like to state, when you're bringing an import into a team that doesn't have any other players of that nationality, sometimes communication can really be a problem, and Kana has really struggled in the back half of these games, and it very much feels like he's not on the same page as the rest of his team. Maybe his English is fine, maybe it's not. Like, it's just really hard to know how someone is going to be able to adapt to these split-second scenarios in which they're not in an environment where they've been communicating for their entire pro career, because Kana's never had a language problem. He's played in Korea his entire career, so it's not really gone all that well. He has lost a couple of lane matchups that he really shouldn't have lost, and even with the bot lane looking okay in this game, Zeri Yuumi is something that honestly, it's disgusting and I hate it, and Yuumi in pro play is something I never want to see again, but it works for Corp. It allows Targamas to just be a facilitator for Upset and allows Upset to play a little bit safer and really not have to do all that much in the early game because of that inevitability. It kind of plays plays into both of their strengths, and I think, honestly, they were the better bot lane in this game, even if I do think that was a lot more like the resource idea in terms of just individual mechanical skill. I wouldn't expect that to be the case if this lane matchup were different, but, you know, Vladi was generally fine. He's probably been the most consistent player on this team. Closer is somebody who's just not been good over the course of this split. K-Corp still has their own problems. I understand that they're probably the best of the rest by default right now, but just because they're at number 5 doesn't mean that they're competing for number 4. And for SK, they are clearly one of the upper teams in the league. They are clearly, you know, one of the better teams in the LEC. The expectation is no longer like, let's try and see if we can make the season finals. The expectation for this team is minimum like top 3 or top 4 this split. You know, likely they're looking at being champions, and then, you know, if they can get that or if they can't get that, they want to make worlds. Like, that is the expectation for SK, and they are absolutely good enough to be able to get there. And that's going to bring us to our final game here of day number 1. And man, do I have some strong opinions just surrounding the conversation right now that I want to get out in this segment. Pardon if I don't talk about the game as much as normal. It's Mad Lions Koi taking on Team BDS. And I'll talk about the game at least a little bit. BDS was able to pick up the win. No surprise there. But, you know, I'm going to spoil it right now. I'm going to spend a majority of this segment complaining and ranting. If that's not something that you like, if that's the part of the videos that you like the least when it comes to, you know, these personal weekly reviews, then skip to the next segment. I'm not going to be mad at you. It's not going to frustrate me if you're not watching this, but I do want to give you fair warning ahead of time. Some, you know, aggressive opinions might be shared. Some controversial opinions might be shared on the way the fandom is just generally reacting, the way the online community tends to treat teams in the LEC, and just generally the conversation surrounding the slightest slip-ups in the LEC and why they are always taken out of context and why fans have actively been detrimental to the league growing and staying, you know, strong. You know, if you don't want to hear about any of that, then skip to the next segment. Trust me, you probably won't be interested. I'll quickly talk about the game here. The game is rather uninteresting. This was a really boring game, all things considered. BDS was just straight up better in basically every aspect. Their macro is impeccable, which is why they are so easily able to beat down teams that aren't as good as them. They've struggled against the best teams in the league, quote unquote. They really haven't struggled that much against the best teams in the league, but they've quote unquote struggled against the best teams in the league, but they just destroy bad teams that don't have the coordination that they do. And they're talented enough to be able to get those early leads very consistently. Whether you want to give player of the game to either Adam or Nuke, I think it's really up to you. Adam was the one who got it on broadcast, and trust me, I'm the biggest Adam fan in the world. He was good this game on the volley bear, did a lot of really nice things. Sheo was really good on the Talia, but I'm going to give player of the game to Nuke in the mid lane on the Lucian. The mid gap was definitely the biggest, in my opinion. Frescowy playing Corki as if he was old Corki and just dying by going in for absolutely no reason. We'll talk about that in a second. But Nuke was really good, and I think, honestly, I've been too hard on Nuke over the course of this year. When I look back at the metrics that I used to track a lot of these players, he's actually really high in basically every metric across the entire year, and so maybe I have been a little bit harsh on Nuke, calling him just like an average mid laner. He is definitely an above-average mid laner at this level. I still worry about his ability to play in, like, clutch moments because he has been a little bit bad in best-of-5s, but, you know, we're picking at straws there. Ice and Labrov continue to be probably the second best bot lane in the LEC right now, only behind SKs. They are just super consistent, and Ice is perfect for this meta where he can just play late game carries and just win 5v5s. And then, of course, Adam's been very good. Sheo, I think, has gotten better in the summer split. There's a lot to like about BDS, and Mad Lions did not play well in this game. There's really not a lot to like about what Mad Lions is doing right now. I'm not going to defend their current form because their current form is really bad. Frescowy is a really easy choice for dud of the game. He was horrible in this one. On the Corki, basically no impact on the game at all, was actively inting in terms of his positioning. Again, I don't really know what was going through his head. He has been miserable over the past couple of weeks. I mean, truly unplayable over the past couple of weeks, which is unfortunate. Elyoya continues to really struggle. I will save this for later, but I see some people comparing him to Comp in terms of fall off. That's crazy to me. Like, that's not even comparable. Pun entirely not intended there, but Comp is like 10 times worse than Elyoya is. Even with Elyoya struggling this split, people forget that he was the best jungler in the league like 6 months ago, and so, you know, to say that he has fallen off in the same way that Comp has fallen off, like, that is just an ignorant take, in my opinion. And, you know, even if he's playing bad right now, like, I think it would be ignorant to expect that to continue over the next couple of months. But Mirwin, also a player that I just don't have a lot of faith in. I think he's Adam, but like worse at it, and I think that became clear in this. I'm a big defender of Supa and Alvaro because I think Supa has been the only player trying to win games on this team, and that very much continued, where he was able to get some resources on the Kai'Sa, but for the most part was still pretty ineffectual. The thing I really want to talk about when it comes to this team is just the general fan sentiment around teams that aren't winning in the LEC. We've seen it time and time and time again. It's happening to Mad right now. You know, Rogue was kind of getting this treatment, still is getting this treatment, and I'm sure, you know, I'll talk about this more later when we get to the Rogue section, but BDS got this when they were really bad. Basically, anytime a team is not doing well at any given point, you know, Corp got this earlier this year, it is instantly like, why are they in the LEC? It's like, this org is the worst, they should be kicked out. And I think BDS is actually a really great example of just like, it's just so absurd to me that LEC fans have the memory of a goldfish and the patience of like an infant child, because, you know, BDS 1 year after they were a bad team all of a sudden becomes one of the more interesting teams. Corp actually is able to put a roster around them because they're trying, and all of a sudden they get better. You know, Rogue has been a perennial contender and just didn't really have a lot of money this offseason and reportedly wants to go more in next season. Mad Lions was in finals 6 months ago. There are so many things to talk about in terms of why I think it's so absurd that LEC fans have this reaction, and why I think it is detrimental to the league as a whole, because these teams get put in boxes that they really don't have a lot of opportunity to break out of. It ruins fandom, it creates bad narratives, and generally I think it hurts the culture overall. But even more harmful, I think, is just the reactionary takes that people have about individual players. I talked about it a bit earlier with the Elyoya and the Comp example, where people are saying that, oh, Elyoya is basically Comp because he's fallen off. Yeah, Elyoya's been about as good as Comp for like a month and a half, where he was significantly better than him over the course of the rest of this year and significantly better than him over the course of all of last year. The reason I'm out on Comp is because he's been bad for a year and a half, and he was bad before 2022. Elyoya has never been bad before in his career. He truly is not. He has never been anything other than one of the best junglers in the league. He came in as a rookie and won back-to-back titles. Like, Elyoya has consistently been one of the best junglers, and he's going through a rough patch right now. And in the same idea, the number one prevailing thought from basically everyone in the community, it seems, around Mad Lions right now is, oh, Elyoya failed as a GM. Elyoya is obviously a moron for bringing a bunch of people up from Movistar and having it not work out. What an, I'm sorry, if you don't like expletives, probably skip this part. What a fucking ignorant take. Like, truly, I don't mean to be so aggressive, but this team made finals in winter. It's been 6 months. It's not even been a year, and they're going through a rough patch for a full rookie team. You have rookies that are struggling to be able to maintain consistency. You know, like every rookie that has ever come up to the LEC has. Like, it is so rare for young players to be good throughout an entire split. It's just they don't have the veterans to be able to mask that right now. And you're sitting here and saying that the entire experiment was a failure, even if MDK misses out on top 8 this split, which they're in a position to do. Obviously, their schedule is very favorable. They end up, you know, playing Rogue on the next day, which we will talk about. But even if MDK misses top 8, I don't know how you can look at this year and say that everything was for naught because they were bad in summer. They were top 2 in winter. They were top 6 in spring. This roster was projected 10th at the beginning of the year by everybody. Look at every consensus power ranking. Again, it just feels like such an ignorant take to sit here and say that this is some sort of failure. Supa and Alvaro have proven at multiple points that they can compete with the best bot lanes in Europe, and maybe they're not playing perfect right now, but again, they're young and the rest of the team is really tragic around them. Mirwin was the same player that these same people were hyping up as the next second coming of Jesus Christ like 3 months ago, and now everybody's turned on him because, you know, they set their own expectations too high instead of just realizing where Mirwin was as a player. Frescowy is returning back to earth a bit, but he was so good over the beginning part of the year, and again, Elyoya has received so much bad, you know, publicity and bad fan sentiment purely because he was the one that vouched for this roster to be put together. It's just such a ridiculous sentiment in my opinion, and it really is something that frustrates me. I really try not to get super heated on this channel, but this is something that has been prevailing throughout the entirety of this split, and I honestly just think it's laughable. I think it's a ridiculous sentiment, and I think, quite frankly, I can't reasonably imagine anyone believing this. Like, I can't reasonably imagine that there is somebody who is watching how Mad has played over the course of this year and just the general way that this team is operating and saying, yeah, this org deserves to be out of the LEC. Like, I think you would truly have to be ignorant at that point. You'd have to be willfully ignorant at that point. So that's my rant. I'm sorry if you stuck around and you weren't interested. I gave you fair warning. I will never do a rant this heated without giving fair warning at the beginning. So if you stuck around, you know, that's what we were doing here. BDS is good. That's the takeaway you want to take from this. 7-1, pretty good record for BDS, but Mad Lions does not deserve nearly half the hate that they are getting. And, you know, I think just the entire narrative surrounding it is utterly ridiculous. But then moving on now to day number 2, and this is the final day of the LEC regular season here in the summer split. It is win or go home for a lot of these teams. At least getting to that third win is super crucial, and honestly, depending on how things work out, we could be getting tiebreakers at the end of today. So I'm excited to get into it, and that means kicking it off with game number 1, which was a matchup between Team Vitality and SK Gaming. And SK is going to pick up the win, although this was certainly not an easy win for them. Vitality basically gifted it to them on a silver platter. They had a really bad early game, SK that is, and they were still able to survive. They were able to, keep their composure, and with Camille and Azir and Kaisa, they had a lot of tools in the late game to be able to come back. You look at where Vitality's gold was when they were able to generate that large lead. You had a lot of gold on Kalista, you had a lot of gold on Cassante, you had the Sejuani that was hopefully going to be kind of facilitating that, but really your late game carry is supposed to be this Aurelion Sol, and he never really got going in this one. They never really were able to get him the resources he needed, and VTO was not the better mid laner in this game, and that's good for SK. So they're ending at 8-1. I mean, they could very easily finish as the number 1 team in the LEC in terms of the regular season standings. They could be the number 1 seed going into playoffs, and obviously we've seen SK have good regular season records in previous splits, especially as we've transitioned into this 3-split format, but we've never seen it actually matter. I think it's pretty clear this SK team is built a bit different. They're not perfect, which we'll definitely talk about. I have some concerns about whether or not they're going to be able to win, the LEC in total, but they're certainly going to be a team that tries, and player of the game is once again going to go to Niski in the mid lane. Another time where Niski is really, really good for this team, and he has been one of the best mid laners throughout this entire split. I know a lot of the attention has gone on Rahel and Luan, but Niski has been a top 3 player on this team. I think he's been a bit better than relevant throughout the summer split, and I think he has been a top, 2 to 3 mid laner in the LEC in terms of performances, just individual performances in summer, and that's a really good sign. It shows that when he does have the talent around him, that skill set where he makes everybody else look better, it can still come out. I think sometimes we get lost in the shuffle of, oh, Niski's not a dominant hyper carry in the same way that someone like Humanoid can be to elevate worse players around him. Niski's not that kind of player, but Niski with a good team is going to look better at times than Humanoid as he is right now. He's looking a lot better than him right now, and someone like VTO on the other side, who also is probably more mechanically talented, but not nearly as consistent as someone like Niski. So nice to see him really show up in these late fights. He has been a phenomenal team fighter, like a game ender, in terms of how he's able to play these 5v5s, and if he's going to keep that up, it's going to be basically impossible to stop SK because the bot lane is still winning. Rahel and Luan are still doing a good job of not losing resources and making sure that they are at least relevant in these late fights, and that's really all that matters. When they win hard, and when they lose, they barely lose at all. It's why I consider them the best bot lane in the LEC right now. Irrelevant was really good in this game, even with Photon being able to generate an early lead and being kind of the pseudo carry, like the best player on Vitality in this game, and all of those things are positives for SK, but unfortunately I am going to have to give them dud of the game as well. And it's going to go to Isma for his early game. This is really the concern, is that, quite frankly, Isma has not been very good this split. This team has been good in spite of their jungle position and not because of their jungle position, and I think that that is certainly something to continue to monitor. If Isma doesn't take that next leap, if he continues to fall into this cycle where, his early games are a little bit of a letdown after level 3, his levels 3 to 6 or 3 to 7 really aren't all that good. He's one of the weakest junglers in the league in that regard, and if that's going to be the case, if his mid games aren't going to be particularly consistent, then you're just relying on your lanes winning to be able to actually win games. That's not a strategy that I think you can get away with when you're playing teams like G2 or Fnatic or even a BDS, where like their lanes are just so strong. Like 1v1, you can't guarantee that you're going to win every single game, especially in a best of 5. You need macro differences to be able to step up and like really take over, and typically speaking, we've seen junglers get better with Niski in the mid lane, and that's just not really happened here for SK. So Isma is definitely still a concern, but quite frankly, he's really the only concern for SK at this point. I really believe in the other 4 members of this team, being able to compete for an LEC title, and I think as a high-end, expectation, that is about as much of a dream as you could ask for SK, and then for Vitality, that's the end of at least their regular season record. They're going to 2-7 to end this split. They're still going to potentially have a chance to make top 8. It's not guaranteed that they're out, depending on how the Mad Lions Lions Rogue series ends up going, if, they end up all at 2 wins, which is very possible. If things go, according to chalk, then they're going to have a 3-way tiebreaker, and we'll figure that out at the end of the day. But they had this game in hand. Honestly, they really should have won this, and they should have guaranteed their own spot in top 8. But the fact that they didn't is definitely a bit disappointing after that early game lead. Photon, I thought, played really well this game. It's really nice to see him get better over the course of the split, because he was really rough in week number 1. I think people forget just how bad he was in the first week of the season. I think Linsas has looked like an upgrade to Douglas. I think he's individually looked better, but the team has looked significantly worse trying to play around him than they did around Douglas. I don't know if it's a communication thing or what, but it's certainly been a bit of a problem for them. And then, Karzi's been generally fine. I think he's definitely been better this week than he was in week number 3. It seems to be like an off and on kind of thing. It's always been that for Karzi. He was dominant in week 2, just completely took over when the team went 2-0. And then when this team went 0-2 last week, he was horrible, and this week he was fine. It just kind of is what it is with Karzi. Hilly was generally fine. He didn't make those ridiculous plays because he was on Renata instead of Leona this game. But VTO continues to really underwhelm me. I think he was so integral towards this comp, and he really didn't do anything. Niski was definitely better. So Vitality dropping to 2-7, they have to rely now on other teams to at least give them an opportunity to make it out of the bottom 2. If things don't go according to plan, if Rogue ends up winning today and Mad Lions ends up at, 1-8, and that ends up being their split, and Rogue ends up at 3 wins, Vitality's doomed. Like, the pressure is now out of their own hands. They have to hope for a tiebreaker. They have to hope for the right results, and that's never a great position to be in. But for SK Gaming, this is one of the best teams in the LEC. I think the record is a little bit of a lie, if only because I don't think they're the number 1 team in the LEC right now, but I certainly think they have enough talent to make it close. But then moving on now to game number 2, and this is likely the most consequential game of the second day, at the very least, in terms of the pre-tiebreakers. It's Mad Lions Koi taking on Rogue, and Mad Lions is going to pick up a major victory for themselves. They keep themselves alive. They move to 2-7. They, more importantly, push Rogue to 2-7, which now means that we are going to get a 3-way tiebreaker at the end of the day. Mad Lions, Rogue, Vitality, all sitting at 2 wins. We are going to be looking at a situation where 2 of them do not make the top 8, and only one of them can get out alive. It's going to be an interesting, little end of the split here. I'm really excited to see what ends up happening. But this is big for Mad. This game was very sloppy from them, from Rogue, from everybody involved. I think that there were a couple of really good plays involved from Mad Lions, a couple of really bad plays from Rogue, just generally a lack of mistakes that ended up getting Mad Lions over the top, even if they weren't exactly the most aggressive team in the entire world. And honestly, in terms of where their confidence is at right now, this is all you have to do. You just have to not lose. If you're going up against a team like Rogue, hell, if you're going up against half the teams in the league at the current moment, if you don't make a game-losing error, they probably will. And so you just need to put yourself in a position to be able to capitalize, and that's exactly what Mad Lions did here. Player of the game is pretty obviously going to go to Supa. I once again will die on the hill that he has very clearly been the only player trying on this team in summer. I really do think that it's been everybody else that has struggled so much at being able to maintain consistency. I think Mirwin, Elyoya, Frescowy, they have been well documented in terms of their lack of success so far this split, but Alvaro, I think, has really struggled down in the bot lane as well, being able to generate actual positive plays. He's just been super passive, but Supa's actually going out and trying to win fights, trying to generate resources. He's really the only one kind of looking at the game and attempting to win it at times, it would seem, and he is talented enough to where even if the rest of the team isn't working, you can always kind of rely on him to be relevant in the mid and late game because of the mechanics. Now, it's not always going to be perfect, but in a league where AD carry talent is a little thin, it's nice to have a player in Supa who, mechanically speaking, is just able to create things. He's not a perfect player. He certainly has his flaws, as we talked about in the Mad Lions segment before, but, he is certainly good enough to win games off of, and that's what happened here on Zeri. The difference between him and Comp is just so ginormous. Like, it is truly not even remotely in the vicinity of being comparable, and that's why it made me so frustrated to see players like Elyoya get compared to Comp, because you watch Mad Lions play Rogue in this game, and Comp is just not there. Like, there is a difference. I hope this proved the difference, but Elyoya was actually the other player who was also really good in this game down the stretch for the most part. Could have been a bit more active in the early game. I do think that there were a lot of plays that were a little bit too passive from him. He just seems off kilter right now. He was somebody who really dominated the mid game basically his entire career, since 2021, since coming into the LEC. He's never been a jungler that's really taken it slow, but against a team like Rogue, not really loving the idea of just like, let's pick Viego and wait to the late game. That's kind of what they want you to do. So a little bit frustrated with Elyoya, but no major mistakes. Again, no major mistakes from Fresskowy in the mid lane. And again, from those two, Elyoya, Fresskowy in particular, that's all you're asking, is just not to make mistakes, because those two have been making critical errors over the course of the last few weeks. And so nice to see them get back to that more stable middle of the map that they were in both spring and in winter. Mirwin still is somebody that's going to trade his life in a lot of these fights. He's willing to die first. Alvaro, with a couple of good engages. I don't think either of them were perfect, but Supa is the main carry in this game, the one that was actually able to win lane and just kind of transition that mid-game pressure into actual, like, real, tangible resources. That's a plus to him, and, Mad did enough to be able to win, even if I do want to see them look better than this. And then Rogue is just a disaster. They have stayed at number 10 in my power rankings for a reason. This is the worst team in the LEC, and they continue to prove it. I'm almost certain they will be one of the two teams that do not end up making top 8. They just do not feel like they have the ability to make top 8. They have not looked good at any point this year, and they have refused to really make any noticeable changes. Of course, Finn coming into the top lane was the only one they made before the spring split after winter, and it's not like he's like significantly better than Shigendo was for this team. It's just a disaster. I think you can look in a lot of different directions, but the bot lane is just horrendous. I mean, truly one of the worst that the LEC has ever had. Maybe in terms of actual performance on the Rift, we've at length talked about how bad Comp is, and he did nothing in this game. I think the scoreline is even a little bit too kind to how bad Comp was, because I don't think one death is indicative of just how little Comp did in this one, but Zoelise is going to get dead of the game, because in the opposite kind of sense, Zoelise did way too much in this game, and that's been a bit of a problem for him over the course of this year, is that Comp is not really the kind of AD carry that is good enough or really aggressive enough to follow up on plays, and Zoelise continues to look even when his team is not ready for them. It's just a lack of understanding of the position that he individually needs to be in as the support for this team. It just feels like a complete disconnect. Larson is also so passive. I mean, it is truly baffling to watch him play something like Corki, where he is given resources and he does absolutely nothing with them in these fights. He's reverted to the worst version of himself, and I think that that's very frustrating to watch. Finn pulls out his signature Kled here. I think some people forget that this is kind of a signature pick for him, going back to the original Rogue days, but it's just not enough here. Usually when he pulls out Kled, he dominates, and that can't even save Rogue. Like, that level of aggression can't even save Rogue from being super inactive in the mid to late game and just kind of slowly bleeding to death. So that's who they are. They dropped to 2-7, and now you're in a three-way tie for last place. Two of those teams, like I said, are going to be in 9th, 10th. One of those teams will be getting out. We'll cover that in the tiebreakers at the end of the video, but for Rogue to be there, it's not a surprise. For MDK to be there, it's a bit of a surprise, but I think they're going to be happy to at least be able to get the opportunity to play their way out with how this split has gone so far. I certainly don't think they're the worst of the teams going into that tiebreaker. I don't think people are expecting them to be anything other than bottom two with how they've played, but at least Supa is playing well right now, and hopefully you can get a couple of good performances out of some players that have been underperforming. And then moving on to game number 3, and that means going from two of the worst teams in the league to two of the best teams in the league. It's Team BDS taking on Fnatic, and BDS is going to pick up yet another victory, and they're going to join SK at 8-1 at the top of the standings. Absolutely ridiculous stuff from BDS. Again, I think this record is a little bit less indicative of just how strong individually they are as a team. They are a good team, do not get me wrong, but I'm not sure if I'm expecting them to go out and win the LEC in terms of what I think will happen. They certainly have the potential to do so, but this roster has definitely struggled in pivotal moments in the past. The thing that gives me some hope is that BDS is playing really well right now. There are a couple of players that I think are in the best form that they've been in all of 2024 so far, and then you've got Fnatic on the other side, who's one of the main, contenders for a title, who really dominated a majority of this regular season, and they are in the worst form that they have been in quite a while. An 0-2 week for them, and a couple of their players, one player obviously in particular with just an absolutely miserable week that we will definitely talk about. But for BDS, player of the game is once again going to go to Nuke, and honestly, has Nuke been a top 1, like top 2 mid laner in the LEC this split? Like, if you ignore spring and winter, if you just completely ignore what has happened over the course of this year, and that's not to say he's been bad this year, just that he's been good and not great, I would say, for a majority of this year. I think I've underrated on this channel just how good Nuke has been, and I think generally the community has underrated just how good Nuke has been in the mid lane in summer. I think there is a real argument that he has been the most valuable mid laner to his individual team in the LEC this summer split. He's certainly in the conversation in terms of consistency. Like him, Niski, and obviously Caps, I think, are the three that you are going to look at in terms of, Jackie's might be in that conversation as well, just because GX would be such a disaster without him. But Nuke has been so freaking good for BDS. He's really gotten his style down to a T, playing things like Talia and being able to use his really good map sense in the mid game to be able to just influence games so quickly. His macro is incredible, and he has linked up very well with Sheo, and it's made it a lot easier for Ice to carry down in the late game and in the bot lane. It's made it easier for Adam to really get back on track in summer. Nuke has been phenomenal. This is the best I think he's ever played in the LEC, and I'm really excited to see if that form translates to the best of fives, because, we've seen Nuke play really well in the best of ones and the best of threes before, but we've never really seen it translate into, like, really successful best of five series. That's really where he's always had a bit of a disadvantage from his contemporaries in terms of rankings, but this is maybe the best form he's ever been in, so hopefully this means he's made that market improvement and can really start to separate himself from a lot of the other players he gets compared to. But it's not just him that stepped up. Obviously, Ice has probably had his best split across this year so far. Not that he's been bad at all, he's just kind of been this low resource, consistent bot laner that can win you fights later on, and he's been that, but he's been that a little bit more flashily over the course of the summer split, where he's just, like, very much winning 5v5s now for BDS. I think Adam has been a huge improvement over what he was in spring, even if he was also very good in winter. Lebrav has been good, even if maybe he was a little bit better in winter, he's still been very good here, and I think the ability to set up Ice has been undervalued by Lebrav. Sheo is probably the player who stood out the least, but he just had a 6-kill Viego game and got multiple resets here, and honestly, it's probably been his best split across this year as well. So for BDS, I'm really feeling them right now. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that all of their woes are going to go away, but I think this team is better than they are getting credit for at the moment. And then for Fnatic, again, we talked about it earlier this week. I don't want to harp on it too much, but they are probably in the worst form they've been in all year, or at least close to it. Humanoid is just playing miserable. He's going to get yet another dud of the game. I mean, he has been really bad. The past 4 games from Fnatic have been really rough to watch in terms of consistency, and a lot of that is the fact that Humanoid is just straight up losing and doing absolutely nothing. Again, I want to reiterate, we've seen this out of Humanoid before. This isn't some out of character kind of excursion for Humanoid, like, oh, what is happening to Huma? Why is he starting to play bad? He is incredibly streaky, and there are going to be stretches where he is just bad individually as a player, not even like below average, like bad, like as a player, but you have to hope that those are going to be in low pressure situations. Right now they are. End of the regular season, Fnatic had qualified for the playoffs a long time ago. Really the only thing that they needed to fight for was potential first seed or second seed or something like that, but that's not all that important if you feel like you can beat other teams in best of 3. So long as you get into that best of 5 stage, nothing really matters. You do want to be one of the top 3 teams, in terms of how things work out championship points wise, but these games don't matter all that much. These losses don't matter all that much. But if this is indicative at all of how Humanoid is playing right now, if this is indicative of the form that Humanoid is going to have going into the playoffs, it is a bit concerning. And Razork, I think, has also struggled more because of it. I think maybe we were undervaluing Humanoid in terms of the pressure he created for jungle. I do think Razork has still been the best player on Fnatic, and I still think this is the best year of his career, but he has been significantly worse when Humanoid is not winning in the mid lane. I think Noah and Jun are still doing interesting things in the bot lane, but Ice and Lebrav were better this game. It's not like Noah and Jun dominated the 2v2. Oscar Rinnan's been essentially replaceable on the top side. He's been good this split, but, I don't think that he has really changed this team's outcome. I think he's more been a product of how this team has been able to play. So for Fnatic, the only thing that you're concerned about is that this form might translate into playoffs, but so long as this is just them not caring about games at the end of the regular season where they had already locked a playoff spot, then, I'm not going to panic too much. But for BDS, they do look very good. I just want to see it in the best of 5s. If they can finally show up and just win a best of 5 at some point this split, it's going to make me feel a lot better about this team's chances of going to Worlds. And then moving on to game number 4 here, and another pretty inconsequential matchup in terms of standings overall. It's Team Heretics taking on G2 Esports, and G2 is going to pick up the win, but this was a fun game to watch, and this is a fun game to cover because G2's draft is definitely very interesting. What a crazy thing to pull out. I mean, it's the final game of the season, nothing really to play for. I understand why you might want to go for, a bit of a weirder comp. You've got the Caitlyn down in the bot lane with the Mundo Zyra as your top jungle duo, and Quite frankly, if I'm Heretics, I'm tilted beyond belief because this comp was impossible to play into. I don't even know what you're supposed to do into Mundo Zyra. This felt legitimately unbeatable for the draft that they ended up drafting. Azir, Zeri, like even with Zeri getting mega fed in this game, you were never going to break through Mundo, and having to walk through like Mundo plus Zyra to get to anything, it's just a disaster. Like there's literally no way to enter any fights in this game. You know, I give Heretics a lot of credit. They did a good job of at least trying to get themselves into a good position because they wanted to get one of their hyper carries, and honestly both of their hyper carries did kind of get online. But again, who's gonna kill the Mundo here? You have absolutely no way to get through his ginormous health stat, and Zyra does create a lot of problems as well. So the draft actually really ended up working out for G2, and because of that, Broken Blade is gonna get my player of the game. He's been very good this split. I think there's an argument that this has been his best regular season of the year so far, but he has always been a player that's been better in best of fives than he has been in best of ones, and so I'm not really super concerned. It's just kind of cool to see him pull out something like a Mundo in the top lane and have it work so successfully. I want to see more of these weird picks. I think tanks are undervalued in the top lane right now. I think we are seeing a lot of carries up in that position, you know, for a lot of players that just like to play carries a bit more, but especially for, you know, drafts like this where, you know, Azir plus Zeri is so common right now and you really have no way to break through ginormous health bars quickly with Azir or Zeri, then Mundo becomes a lot more valuable just inherently as a champion. So really cool to see G2 adapt to that. But again, the Zyra really worked out for them. This is really starting to look like me being wrong about this champion. I was kind of not in on Zyra. I was always looking at it at the beginning of the split like, why are people picking this? You know, it feels like a gimmick. It feels like you do like one or two things really well and everything else is really poor. And when you go up against a good jungler, you're like, you know, they can take advantage of that. But, you know, it's really not turned out to be the case. It turns out if you play it well and if your team is able to support it well in the mid game, it just becomes a major issue in the late game. And honestly, you know, I'm happy to take the L on that because Zyra is a really valuable pick right now, and especially for the players that are clearly more practiced on that champion than others, it is really clear why it ends up working. I would not recommend Zyra for every team. I think you have to be of a certain skill level to really pull that champion off, but it's been very successful globally in terms of at least like whether it's winning or not, like it's creating an impact and it's being positive for the team as a whole. And, you know, I think that that is something that I'm definitely taking into account. Caps, Hans, Mickey, they were all really good here. Hans in particular did a really good job of getting strong on the Caitlyn. Again, Caitlyn is one of those champs that I'm always just confused why she's not in pro more, because she does the thing that she's supposed to do really well. I get we're in this hyper carry meta where like Zeri and, you know, a lot of these, you know, Jinx, a lot of these, you know, hyper carries down in the bot lane are a little bit more viable right now than traditionally. So you're in this situation where you're scared of getting outscaled, but Caitlyn's scaling curve is not exactly that linear. I think a lot of people forget that she is really strong in the early game. In the first couple of levels, she's basically impossible to beat because of her range, and it just makes it very difficult to trade with her. You get a lot of upper hands in lane. Everybody knows that. That's what Caitlyn's famous for, but I think people forget just how strong Caitlyn is at 4 items, or like 3 items really at this point. Maybe she's not as strong as Zeri or, you know, as Jinx or these other hyper carries that are getting more play, but she's certainly not like weak in the later half of the game. Her problem is just like the 1 to 2 item power spike is very weak for her. Like she's just going to be weaker in that stage of the game than everybody else, but I think you can live with that out of the AD carry role. So nice to see Caitlyn get some play. Again, Caps and Mickey were fine, but G2 with kind of a weird draft on the top side that really ended up working out. And then for Heretics, they just had no answer to the Mundo. Like they really didn't have any way to deal with him. They didn't have any way to deal with Zyra either, and you know they just kind of let themselves down in that stage of the game. I think they individually actually played pretty well. There really aren't a lot of complaints from me in terms of their gameplay. Dud of the game is going to go to Wunder, if only because the Cassante did literally nothing over the course of this game, and his lane opponent was the most influential player in the entire game. So you just sit there and you're like, Wunder could have been a bit better, but I don't think he was a disaster. There have absolutely been worse Wunder games over the course of this split and this year just in general, but everybody else in this team did fine. I mean, Flacket and Zviru were in a good position to carry the game so long as they were actually able to get through this ridiculous front line, which they just weren't able to do all that quickly. GIANTX did a good job of setting them up in the mid to late game to get them gold, to get them experience. Again, it just didn't end up mattering. I thought Trimby had a couple of good engages. I'm not going to put this one on Heretics. I don't think they played individually all that bad. I think they really did put up a nice fight against G2. They just were at such a disadvantage because of the weird shit that G2 wanted to pull out on red side. So, you know, I'm not freaking out about Heretics. I think overall this was a pretty good final week, and hopefully it gives them some confidence heading into the best of threes. And for G2, you know, they're at 7-2 to end the split. It's a really good place to be. They're not going to be first place, but third place is really not all that bad. And, you know, generally G2 are just going to be considered favorites no matter what. They're undefeated in weeks 2, 3, and 4. And so this is definitely still the scariest team in the LEC, and I don't think anybody's really going to debate that. And that's going to bring us to our fifth and final game of the actual regular season here before we get into tiebreakers. And again, pretty inconsequential game, all things considered, but it definitely gives us a better idea. It's GIANTX taking on Corp. And Corp is going to pick up the win here. They're going to move to 4-5, and you know what? This puts them alone in 5th place in the standings right now, and that's really not all that bad. I know some people are going to say that Corp had higher upside than this, but 4-5 after how this year has gone so far has to feel like an oasis in the desert. I mean, truly, it is by far the best outcome that they have had in the LEC so far. This is going to be the first time that they have made top 8, and they're finally going to get a chance to play something other than a best of one, so excited to see what this team is able to do. I think that there are quite a few players on this team that are playing really well right now, and, you know, I've shouted a lot of them out over the course of this split, but a couple had really good weeks, and I think that I'm excited to talk about that. Kana's going to get player of the game here in the top lane on the Renekton. He was definitely a bit shakier in their first game this week, but he was awesome here in game number 2. Antonio on the other side of this matchup has been a positive for GX over the course of this split. He's easily been their second best player, and so for Kana to come into that matchup, go one-on-one and just kind of win it, like, it's expected. This is what we all thought would happen when these two faced off at the beginning of the split. Like, Antonio was somebody that didn't really have a lot of good expectations, and, you know, Kana was somebody who came in with a ridiculous amount, having played in the LCK and been to Worlds and been a player that had been really successful for a long time. You know, this is supposed to be a mismatch on paper, and it kind of was an execution here, but in terms of the performances that these two had given over the course of this split, I don't know if people anticipated this being as much of a one-sided affair in the top lane as it was. Kana was really good on the Renekton, but I do want to shout out the carry duo here. Vladi and Upset were both really good this game, and honestly, Vladi has been excellent this split. I'm not going to say he's been like a top 3 mid laner. I think that's probably going a bit far, but he has come in and really solidified this position. It's been a bit of a disaster for Corp. Seiken just was not good for this team. There was really nothing else to say other than that. Seiken had no confidence. That's what I really said every single week in the weekly reviews, is that you watched him play the game and he was just giving up everything. Like 1v1 trades, he wasn't even attempting to try to contest. He was never trying to shove the wave. He was never really trying to do anything in the early game, and it wasn't through lack of like ability to do so. It wasn't through lack of mechanics. He just very much felt scared, or at least that's what it looked like. It looked like he had no confidence in his ability to go out there and actually play against LEC mid laners after things went so bad at the beginning of his tenure. Vladi doesn't have that problem. He is more than willing to try and trade with you. He's more than willing to go out and try and win his own mid lane matchup instead of just trying not to lose, and that's obviously a plus. He's probably been the best player on this team over the course of this entire split when you're just talking about raw consistency. But Upset was really good this week, both games this week. Obviously, game 1, game 2, had the Yuumi in game number 1, so it's hard to really get an idea of how much of that was him, just because Yuumi makes your job so much easier as an AD carry, typically speaking, at the cost of, you know, other avenues of the game. But he was really good on the Zeri here in game number 2 as well, and so excited to see if Upset can keep that form. He's always been a player that's played around his team's level, so if his team is not playing well, he's not really going to elevate them. If his team is playing well, he's going to look pretty good. That's always kind of been Upset's MO, and so it'll be interesting to see, you know, a bit of the Teddy factor here for Upset in the bot lane. I think they're relatively similar players. Teddy, Patrick, you know, Upset, they're all kind of in that same cluster for me in terms of if you put a good situation around them. I think that they are talented enough to be able to make that work. Closer, still concerning me a bit, but this was relatively better, definitely the better jungler in this game in particular, and then Targamas was awesome in this game on the Rakan, but I don't know how realistic it is to expect him to continue to be good because he's been so bad over the course of this year. But fun fact, Targamas becomes the first player in the history of the LEC to go an entire split without picking up a kill, having played like a minimum of, you know, a certain amount of games. I think playing every game of the team split, he didn't get a single kill across this entire split, which is a really funny stat. You know, obviously it doesn't matter. You're the support. That's honestly ideal in terms of supports, but it's just kind of funny that he now holds a couple of records here in the LEC. But, you know, it's a nice win for Corp, and GX I don't think is going to be too frustrated. They're already playing well above their station. I projected this to be a bottom 2 team going into the split. I think, you know, through the first week, they looked like they were going to be a bottom 2 team, and so to see them very comfortably be a team that's not even bottom 2, but like top 6, like somewhere in that zone, I think is really a positive for them overall. I still think they have a lot of things they need to improve on. The bot lane still doesn't impress me really at all. Ignar is going to get dud of the game here. Ignar's not been very good. Again, he's the kind of player that I always say he looks good on good teams, looks bad on bad teams. He is another player who kind of plays to the skill level of his teammates. The player I've been comparing him to, you know, for my LCK fans is Ondil over on the Kwangdong Freaks. I think they play super similarly. It's very funny watching Ondil play because I think that they are basically identical players. And, you know, for Ignar, I think there are situations where he's going to look good, but Patrick is not the kind kind of bot laner that I think is going to get the most out of a player like Ignar. And Patrick, to his credit, is not really playing all that well right now. I still think Patrick is a very mechanically talented ADC that in the right circumstance can make an impact, very similar to Teddy, kind of similar to Upset on the other side of this, but I don't think he's the kind of player that's going to push this team forward as we've seen. He was generally fine here, but, Jackie's going out and trying to make plays on the Sylas. A lot of them didn't work, but at least he's trying. Juhan and Antonio kind of got outplayed on the top side of the map. It just wasn't a perfect game from GX, and I think this does show their limitations. We've been saying the same thing about them throughout the entire split. They are the kind of team that is going to be able to beat teams that aren't quite as consistent and don't really have that macro floor that they have because they are cohesive and they do know what they're supposed to do. They just don't really have the talent to be able to go toe-to-toe with other teams that know what they're supposed to be doing, and so they're really relying on the other teams struggling, and that's helped them, I would say, over the course of this split, but K-Corp has enough going for them right now to where GX didn't really stand a chance in this one. So congratulations to K-Corp. Alone in 5th place has to feel like an amazing accomplishment, an amazing result after the beginning of this year. But that's going to bring us into our tiebreaker games. This is actively going to determine the team that ends up making the 8th spot in the playoffs. So this is ginormous. If you lose at this point, you are out. It is win or go home. These are playoff games for these teams. Obviously, tiebreakers determined who ended up getting the bye in the first game, who got to watch the first two teams play and then, play the winner of that. That will be Vitality. They ended up having the best record against the other two. They had the tiebreaker stats, and so they end up getting that bye, which means our matchup between Mad Lions and Rogue is going to happen first. It's twice in one day. Is Mad going to get the same result, or is Rogue going to show that Mad really was the worst team in the league like their record said heading into the week? Well, the winner was Mad Lions. They are going to pick up the win here. Mad Koi is going to be moving on to that next game to play Vitality. It doesn't mean that they are in. This win does not guarantee them a top 8 spot or anything like that. It just means that Rogue is now officially eliminated. It takes them out of contention, and that's not a shock. Rogue is the worst team in the LEC, and now they have something to officially show for it. That is 0 championship points in winter, 0 in spring, and 0 in summer. Absolutely disgraceful showing from Rogue over the course of this split, considering the roster that they had. I think people expected them to be at least around top 8, somewhere in the vicinity, but for them to not crack it a single time throughout the year is definitely disappointing. I'm not going to go nearly as far as every other person saying that Rogue should be out of the league or something like that. Again, BDS is a great example of what happens when a team just gets it wrong in terms of roster construction, and you kind of have to rebuild from there, but so long as you have the right pieces behind the scenes, things can work. Now, if Rogue continues to really struggle over the next year or so, I'm definitely going to get concerned, but this is a former LEC champion. I'm not going to freak out just yet, but for Mad, this was such an important victory, and it came once again with their bot lane. I will say it was more a team effort. This wasn't any individual player dominating. They just kind of won across the map. In fact, I think this game was significantly better for them than their first win against Rogue on the day, so it is nice to see them play a little bit more complete in terms of their performance, but Alvaro is going to get my player of the game. I've been a bit concerned about Alvaro, not because I think he's been horrible, but because I don't think he's been a top 3 support like he probably has been for a majority of the year. Up until this point, he has been excellent for Mad Lions, and obviously Compenzo Elise are wet paper on the other side of this matchup. They're not exactly putting up a fight in terms of the 2v2 or in terms of actually trying to stop your bot lane from getting ahead, but I thought Alvaro was a lot more aggressive and clearly a lot more confident in this game, and they need that version of him back. They need the version of him that's going to go out there and actively win big moments for them, and that's exactly what he did here. Supa was also very good, of course, leading the team in kills. Didn't really have to do a whole ton this game on the Kai'Sa. I do think that the other game this week was a little bit more influential, and Supa, I think, can afford to take a little bit more of a step back, allow for more of a team victory after some of the games that he's won for this team over the course of this split, but, generally this was another good game from him. Frescowy and Elyoya both going deathless in this game is such a huge sigh of relief because they have been disasters, and Larson and Marcoon, again, not the toughest of competition on the other side of this, but the fact that they are able to step up and just create positive plays without it being some sort of drawback somewhere else on the map, I think is very good. Mirwin was even pretty good on the top side here, but he was playing Skarner. Definitely something to consider, but overall, this was just a good win for Mad Lions. I don't think it's the most dominant game of all time. I'm not completely changing my opinion on Mad, but Rogue is awful, and they went and showed that. They are now out in 10th place here in the summer split. They are the worst team in the LEC, and it is completely undisputable. There really is no other way to look at it. They have been an utter disaster so far in 2024, and their season is over. They don't have any championship points. They are not going to make the season finals. They have absolutely no way to do so, and so their year is done. They will not play another game in 2024, and honestly, it's pretty well deserved. This is just not a team that deserves to really have a shot at any level to try and make anything happen later on in the year, and things have just gone wrong at every phase of the game. Like, Marcoon's gonna get dead of the game here because he did absolutely nothing on the Maokai, just sat there, kind of waited around for his team to lose, was so passive, and that's been pretty indicative of Marcoon over the course of this year. Larson did absolutely nothing, another pretty indicative performance of him where he's, you know, the lowest in terms of deaths on the team. He only died once throughout this entire game, but also he's lowest in terms of kill participation because he does nothing and he plays super passive and super safe, and there's really no actual positives to take away from his performance, even if his KDA is slightly better than everybody else on the team. You have Finn in the top lane who is like attempting to be aggressive, but for the most part it's not working out because, you know, as much as I like Finn, he's really not, mechanically speaking, one of the best top laners in the league, and when you're already in a position where the rest of your map is losing, it's not like you're getting bailed out or resources from another area. And then Comp and Zoelise very publicly have been the worst bot lane in the LEC, and so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and just shit on them again. Everything went wrong for Rogue. Every single one of these players is really looking bad right now, and honestly, I would be a bit surprised if anyone, maybe other than Larson, had a job in the LEC next year. You know, I don't think that anybody has really proven that they deserve to be here. Zoelise had a miserable rookie year. Comp has certainly proven he doesn't deserve to be in the league, quite frankly, at the moment. Like, he needs some time in the ERLs to reassert himself. I think Marcoon certainly hasn't proven anything. Finn certainly hasn't proven anything. I think Larson has a great track record as a former champion and somebody who has been really, really good for a lot of years in the past, that I would believe a team would want to give him a shot in a different circumstance. I could see him having kind of a Jensen 2024 rebound after a really rough 2024 season from him, but you know, I think that that's really the only player that I'm even looking at on Rogue that you could theoretically try and build around, or that any team in the LEC might even be interested in. Everything else needs to be a complete overhaul for this team because of just how much of a disaster it was. And for Mad, they're going to be happy that they're not out, but the job is not done. They have one more tiebreaker that they have to go into, and this could seal their fate, or it could put them into the top 8. But it's time to move into that final tiebreaker game, and we already know the two teams. It's Vitality and Mad Lions, but only one can be moving on to the top 8. Who is it going to be? Well, the winner was Mad Lions Koi. They are going to take the game. They are going to go from 1 win at the beginning of the week to 3 wins over the course of this week alone, 4 wins in total, and they have made the top 8. Their record will, of course, only show the 2-7 because the tiebreaker games aren't for record. They're not regular season games. They're essentially extra playoff games, but Mad Lions is going to be the team to make it into the top 8, and for Vitality, this is an utter disaster. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong has gone wrong for them. They picked up 2 wins in week number 2 and weren't able to get a single one outside of that second week. So much inconsistency, so many veterans that I think were letting this team down at the end of the year. Really just bad performances, and just like Rogue, their year is now done as well because there is no way for them to get into the top 6 in terms of championship points if they're not able to get any this split. And so they're done. They finished 4th in the spring split. They were a top 4 team just last split, and now their year is done. They will not play a single game for the rest of 2024, and it's just incredibly disappointing, but congratulations to Mad Lions, this team that everybody was talking about being an utter disaster, that everybody was just eulogizing before the year was actually over. Turns out they actually do have a lot of good things going for them. They were just in a bad rut, and obviously 1-6 or whatever they were going into the week is a pretty damn bad rut. 1-7, I guess technically coming out of the first day, it's a pretty bad rut. Like, I understand why people were concerned. I myself had them in the bottom 2, and I thought that they were going to lose this game. I thought that they were not going to make top 8, and even then I was still defending them, and yet here we are. They're a top 8 team, and things are starting to look a little bit better. Player of the game is going to go to Elyoya in the jungle. This was a phenomenal Viego performance. This is easily his single best game so far in the summer split, and that's exactly what you want to say in a time of need for Mad Lions. They desperately needed him to show up on the day, and that's exactly what he did. He was amazing here, completely out-jungled Linsas. It was a jungle gap, a jungle canyon, if you will, and this was the right time for him to show up. I still don't think he's been perfect, and I'm not exactly sure if this is the kind of form that's going to be able to translate more consistently, but it's Elyoya. Again, like, his bad form is much more of an outlier than his good form over the course of his career. He's really never had an extended period of time where he has not been one of the best junglers in Europe, and so you're just expecting him to be able to get back to good form, and it's really good to see that, again, in the pivotal moments, he did step up. Obviously, it wouldn't be me if I didn't shout out the bot lane here on Mad Lions, because they are a huge channel darling at this point. I think Supa is a channel darling at this point, and he was excellent here on the Kai'Sa, definitely the one that was capitalizing the most on the resources that were being generated very consistently by Elyoya, by Mirwin, by Fresskowy. Even Alvaro did a really good job in this game of being able to generate resources with really aggressive positioning in the mid game. Overall, just a really good game from MDK. Mirwin was very good, kind of a signature Twisted Fate top, kind of performance from him. They took away the Varus, they took away the Cassante, but they left him the TF, and that was a big mistake for Vitality. Fresskowy has looked significantly better on the Taliyah than he has on other champions, but they gave him the Taliyah, so at the end of the day, there are still real concerns about Mad, and I don't think this is going to lead to some lower bracket run. I think they might be better than teams like GX as long as they get their shit together. Hell, they might be better than teams like, K-Corp or, Team Heretics or, teams in that sphere. I think that that's realistic to think as well, if only just because, Mad is talented enough to be better than them, and those teams struggle in a lot of key areas. If they can figure something out and get a bit more consistent, it's not out of the realm of possibility for them to be relevant. I just don't think they'll be a top 4 team. I think they're still in that cluster with all of the teams in the playoffs that are near the bottom of the standings that still have some major question marks, but at least they are one of those teams. Their season is not over. Their split is not over. They will get to continue on. For Vitality, again, it's disaster. It's worst case scenario. They gave themselves no room for error over the course of this week. They had an incredibly difficult regular season schedule this week, playing a couple of the best teams in the LEC, and then they lost those predictably, and they had to win this tiebreaker, and they just couldn't do it. Dud of the game is going to go to Hylissang, but really, when I talked about the veterans underperforming, Hylissang and VTO were just not good enough this split. Both of them were really underwhelming, and that's really sad to say. I think Hylissang was somebody I defended a lot over the beginning part of this year, because I do think a lot of the aggressive plays that he was making were just, they're fine on different teams. They just weren't fine for this team, but even when this team was following up, those plays weren't exactly ideal, and VTO was just horrible over the course of summer. One of the worst mid laners in the entire league, and he's a big reason why this team did not make top 8, and VTO has been a channel darling in the past, a former MVP of the LEC. This is somebody who has had major success being able to carry teams at this level. Misfits was a prime example of that, but it's just not there anymore. Carzzy was fine this split, but I think people are going to overlook his bad games. He wasn't really all that bad in this one in particular, but, he wasn't phenomenal either. And then you have Photon, who was, generally whatever. I definitely think he got better as the split progressed, but he was horrible at the start. Linsauce clearly doesn't feel like an upgrade because this team brought him in as the only change, and all of a sudden they're now bottom 2. It really doesn't feel good, even if he individually is probably playing better than Douglas was before the switch. So it's just a really weird situation for Vitality. This organization feels cursed beyond belief. Every single year it's the same story, them collapsing down the stretch and not being able to make their expectations a reality. It's just so strange, but at the end of the day, it's Vitality. It's what the org is at this point, and, they've lived up to their reputation so far in 2024, and that's going to be the end of their run. For Mad, congratulations to them. They've done it. They've secured themselves a spot in the top 8. They get to play some best of 3s, and who knows? Again, like I said, this team definitely has enough talent to surprise people. Maybe there is going to be some sort of lower bracket magic run after this tiebreaker series. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC week number 4 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. Typically speaking, this is where I would show you the standings and talk about my power rankings, who's moving up and who's moving down, but we're going to skip that this week because we will be just showing the bracket in just a second. But that means player of the week and dud of the week are going to be coming first. A little bit atypical here, but up on the screen you can see that now, but it's not just the player of the week and the dud of the week that are up on the screen. Of course, you can see my summer split all-pro team. Now, I want to specify this is my personal summer split all-pro team. I will be doing a full year all-pro, list, like first, second, and third team, as I always do, but that's going to be in the preview for the season finals in the same way that I do a playoff preview for the other regions. I do a playoff preview, I talk about my awards, my year-long MVP, my year-long rookie of the year, etc., all that kind of stuff. That's all going to be before the season finals. This is specifically for summer, so before someone calls me out for not having Caps in my all-pro team because it's ridiculous, yes, I agree, Caps will be, spoiler alert, almost certainly MVP of my, yearly all-pro MVP and team awards, but this is just for summer, so we'll go over that in just a minute, but let's get into my player of the week and dud of the week first. For week number 4, player of the week for me is going to go to Nuke, the mid laner for BDS. He really has been underratedly great over the course course of this split. I don't want to say that he's been the best player on BDS, but he's certainly been in the conversation. I think him, Ice, and Adam are certainly the three that you want to kind of consider in that conversation. I think Ice definitely has been the most flashy because of his late game heroics, but Nuke's early and mid games have been nearly perfect, and as we'll see in a second, I think he might have been the best mid laner in the LEC over the course of the summer split, so he's going to get player of the week here in week number 4. My honorable mentions, Niski from SK Gaming. He was also very good over the course of this split, very good this week. The bot lane was a little bit more of a secondary player, which honestly is a pretty good sign that they can win through other lanes that aren't just bot lane, and SK right now is very dangerous, and Niski is a big reason for that. And then Broken Blade, you know, he's Broken Blade. That Mundo game was really fun to watch, but generally speaking, as long as he's given the opportunity to win, he is going to go out there and win. He is the best top laner in the LEC at the current moment. So those are my 2 honorable mentions, but Nuke is going to get player of the week here for week number 4, and then dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Humanoid, the mid laner for Fnatic. I don't even know if this is really all that debatable. Again, tiebreaker games don't count, and so nobody on Rogue got to play 3 horrible games this week. Even Vitality didn't get to play 3 horrible games this week. You know, Hylissang or someone like that certainly would have been considered. Marcoon would have certainly been considered. Comp would have certainly been considered, but, you know, I'm only taking the actual 2 games on days 1 and 2 before the tiebreakers into account, which means that Humanoid, it was the worst player across those 2 games, and I don't even think it was really all that debatable. Fnatic was really bad this week. They lost a lot of their cohesion and their synergy, and just generally speaking, Humanoid lost a lot of laning phases. He was horrible throughout both of these games. He simply has to be better. I've said it enough throughout this video, but he was really, really bad this week. So Humanoid's going to get dud of the week in week number 4, and Nuke is going to get player of the week here in week number 4, but moving into my all-pro teams and kind of explaining why I've chosen each member, the green highlight behind Rahel down in the bot lane just indicates that I think he is the MVP of the summer split. I honestly don't even know if you could go in a different direction. There were other very good players that maybe played on the level of Rahel, but I don't know if there was anybody who more embodied like value to their own individual team this split than Rahel. And that's not to, again, to say that like Niski and Irrelevant and Luan, who we'll talk about in a second, were bad. Just that the clear improvement that SK made the moment that Rahel became their primary carry was so obvious that it's really hard for me to say that anybody else was the most valuable player to their individual team. So he's going to be my all-pro AD carry, and he's going to get my MVP. His bot lane partner, Luan, is also going to be my all-pro support for the summer split. I think they were by far the best bot lane in the LEC, and that's reflected here by my all-pro rankings. I think the top side of the map is a lot easier to explain. Not that those 2 are controversial decisions at all. I don't think I really have any controversial decisions here. Nuke, maybe in the mid lane, would be a controversial one, but like I said, I think he's probably been the best mid laner in the LEC over the course of this split. I think it's been relatively close. There were other really good players. I think you could give it to Caps, but he struggled a bit in week 1, and, you know, that's a little bit more than Nuke had, so you know, it's a little bit just kind of and then Niski was also very good. He was the other player that I really considered for this, but I think Nuke was more valuable to his individual team, especially with his mid-game prio and pressure that he was able to generate. And then top and jungle, you had Razork in the jungle. I've been saying throughout the entire split that I think this is Razork's best year of his career. Things have not been going as according to plan over the past couple of games, but, you know, it's really just been 2 games, and even then, he hasn't been the biggest problem in either of those games, and so I'm not going to blame him entirely. When he wins, he just wins harder than any other jungler, and, you know, I'm definitely more positive on Razork in terms of what he's offered so far in summer, and I do think he was the most valuable jungler to his team, so he's going to get that all-pro nod. And then Broken Blade in the top lane, it's just really hard to deny him being the best top laner in the LEC. He was given more free reign, I would say, over the course of summer than he was in the first couple of splits to be like an individual carry for the team, and I think that that is obviously something that he is very comfortable doing. It's kind of his preferred play style, and I think he has really adopted that role. If you wanted to give this to Adam, that's the other player that I think you could really consider. Adam was much, much better here in summer than he was in spring, and I think he is the player that you want to like duke out this competition with, but I thought Broken Blade was just a tad bit more impactful to his individual team. So those are my all-pro nods, I guess, specifically for the summer split. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with. Do you think that one of these players has absolutely no case to be made to be an all-pro? Am I an idiot for putting them in? Do you think anybody else should have won summer MVP over Rahel? Do you think anybody was more valuable to their individual team? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions down below. But up on the screen now, the playoff bracket. We officially know the playoff bracket. The sides have been generated. SK, Fnatic, GX, and Heretics are on the top side, and BDS, G2, K-Corp, and Mad Lions are on the bottom side. It's certainly going to be an interesting one. I think top 4 feels pretty predictable at the current moment. It very much feels like G2, Fnatic, SK, BDS are the 4 best teams in the LEC, and I think it would be a bit of a surprise if anybody else ended up making the best of 5 stage other than those 4 teams, but that's what makes it so obvious that someone else is going to make it. That that one of those teams is going to shit the bed and that somebody else is going to take one of those spots, because that's just exactly what happens in the LEC. Every time it starts to feel like it's even a little bit predictable, some random team ends up going on a run. I think it could be any of them. It could be Heretics, who definitely started to find better form over this week. I think it could be Corp, who definitely look like the best of the rest right now, even if I don't know what their upside necessarily looks like. Hell, GX could do it. Jackie's is playing incredibly well, and Mad Lions is super hot, coming off of 3 straight wins. Yes, against bad teams, but those could be the 3 wins they need to get themselves back into the confidence, mindset that got them into finals in the first place in the winter split. So I think really anybody could have success. I would be shocked if, if one of the 4 teams ended up really underperforming and not at least being a top 5 or top 6 team. I think that would be majorly disappointing. But, if somebody ends up making it into the top 4 that isn't anticipated, that certainly is something that I'm not going to be the most surprised about of anybody out there. So I'm excited to see what happens in playoffs, but I would love to know if you agree with me on that or not. Do you think the top 4 is as clear as I'm making it out to be? And do you think that it would be an upset for any other team to end up making the best of 5 stage? Or do you think that, the gap between numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7 isn't quite as big as I'm making it out to be? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on that down below, but that is going to do it for the video. If you did enjoy it, really would mean a lot to me if you left a like on the video. It really helps out the channel more than you know, helps get this out to more people, and also just lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, which is always very nice. If you did enjoy it and you do want to stick around, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LEC on this channel, we post about all 4 of the major regions every single week. That's LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL, every single weekly review on this channel, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.